way up to the north at the Georgia border, you know, water comes in through aquifers underground that feeds that central portion of upper central Florida, where all the lakes and the springs are, and they're fed by those underground transmissions of deep water in the aquifers. But at the surface, across the Florida-Georgia border, we have a number of rivers that carry water into Florida, especially out in the Panhandle. And on the, you know, you have to kind of stop and say, how did Florida even get here? But about 400 million years ago, the highest mountains that scientists and geologists believe have ever existed on Earth were to the north of us. They were higher than the Himalaya mountains. They were higher than the Rocky Mountains are today. And they were called, well, what is that mountain range between Canada and Georgia? You silent people?
The Appalachians.
Appalachians, right? So those, it's 400 million years of the Appalachian Mountains being worn down by snow and ice and water. And everything on the east side of the mountain range formed the whole coastline of North America, from Maine all the way down to what's now Florida. And on the west side, it formed the big plains and rolling hills that make up that lower Midwest. And the great rivers drained it. The number of rivers that flow all into the Mississippi are smaller tributaries in Alabama and Mississippi. So they built the coastal plain on this side of Florida, and all of this stuff that went out to the Atlantic Ocean got carried by a current that's the counter current for the Gulf Stream. You know, the big giant Gulf Stream. Crystal clear blue waters if you ever dove in it. But it's out there a ways. But there's a counter current. The Gulf Stream's going this way, but there's a current that goes this way, and then there's one right along the shoreline. So that current was what pulled this long beach that goes all the way from the Florida-Georgia border all the way down here to South Miami. And in that whole distance, there's only two rivers that can break through that beach. One that flows north up here. Here's Orlando around here, and right in here in Green Swamp, a river comes up here, and it's called the river that goes to Jacksonville, and the name of that is?
St. John's.
The St. John's River. So it's a river that flows north in Florida. A lot of people think since Florida's hanging down here, all the water flows to the bottom. But that's not the way it works. This is fairly flat up here with rolling low hills, and near Gainesville and the communities in between down on I-75, you go through those rolling hills and the sand hills, and they're full of lakes and ponds and sandhill kinds of ecological communities. But if you look here, look at all these lines. There's all these lines going this way, and all these lines going down this way. And over here, you see those lines? They're hard to find because they're all out here. Here's one right here. There's a couple here. Those are old hurricanes that came in and dumped enormous amounts of shell and sand and stuff. So those hurricane ridges are the old beach lines. So this was the backbone of Florida. You can see the beach lines on both sides of it, as it was, and that's about 400 million years ago. We had woolly mammoths here. We had giant ground sloths. We had, you know, saber-toothed tigers. They were all wandering around here. The University of Florida archaeologists think that Florida looked a lot at that stage like Africa, velds, grasslands, with little pods of forest, and nothing like it looks today. And that's why those big grazers, the horses started in North America, camels started in North America. We had elephants, they all went over the land bridge, the 2,000-mile land bridge between Alaska and Siberia. They all went that way over to what's now Europe, and people were coming both ways, but mostly from what's now Europe through that land bridge, making their way down the west coast of the United States. And they split when they got down to about what's now Southern California and Arizona. And some of them decided to keep going down the isthmus into Central America. And those were the pre-Columbian societies that are the oldest in this hemisphere. But others decided to come and set up camp, so to speak, and homes in what's now Arizona and New Mexico, where we get the oldest farm fields in the country. And then those kind of historic archaeological digs are just amazing to find. So when you look at this part of Florida from Orlando south, what you're seeing is the central ridge where Highway 27 comes down, all the way down here, and you can see this thing that's been ditched and diked, and that's a river. What river would that one be?
Kissimmee.
The Kissimmee River. So the Kissimmee River leaves Disneyland, comes down here, feeds Lake Okeechobee. There's a couple of other creeks that come in to feed Lake Okeechobee. And then what happened now, you've been going downhill all that time. And what the engineers will tell you is water will only flow downhill if there's more than a foot of slope per mile. In other words, from here to here has to be a foot if I'm going to get water to go downhill for any distance. And anything more shallow than that, less than a foot, then the coefficient of friction of just the water being dragged over sand and over grass slows it down, and it builds up pools. And the soils then start to get all those organics from those plants that grow there. And next thing you know, you have organic soils, you have forests, and you have cypress heads, and all those kind of things happening because there's enough of that beautiful microthelium kind of rhizine to be able to build the soils, whereas the hills are more sand-like and consequently drain too fast, burn too fast, and create a whole different kind of ecological community. So, in essence, did you know this is the longest lagoon from Jacksonville down to Miami? We call it the Indian River Lagoon. And it's the longest lagoon in the world. And it has more diversity of species than any other place in the world in a lagoon. Because I know I have found species up here that I used to collect in Maine. But I also collect plenty of species down here that I can get anywhere in the Caribbean. So all that latitude and translated into species that can make a living in Florida because of that Indian River Lagoon. So this is the current beach, and the lagoon is the buffer for that. And only this river, and there are several other breakthroughs here now. The Corps of Engineers, had the breakthrough. So boats could get in and out of the lagoon instead of having to go miles to find one of the two outfalls. Cape Kennedy and Cape, the Cape here is a bit of an anomaly. But when I used to teach marine biology, I used to know the numbers and I've kind of lost them. But the Corps of Engineers do a regular study, and they measure how much of that silt is crossing the Florida border. How many cubic yards of sand and silt cross in here? And it may be 1 million tons, I'll say, at this point. By the time it gets down here, it may be 750,000. By the time it gets down here, it's depositing sand all the way, right? By the time it gets down here, it may be, a tenth of a million. And now what's happened is Miami can't get any sand anymore. They're too far down the line. So the Corps of Engineers, if you look closely on this, you'll see where there is a break here, there's always a sandbar on the north side of the pass. Well, the sand can't make it across the pass because water's moving in and out of the pass too fast. So it gets into the pass and it gets washed out offshore. Just like in our area here, the Calusa Nature River does between Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach. It takes it out and drops it up. Well, right now it's dropping it up on the north end of the White House, you know? And that's how, you know, these kind of breaks and currents work. So you know what the Corps did? The engineers figured out a solution. All right, everywhere we want a boat cut through here so fishermen can get in and out, we'll put a pump station to pump sand from the north side of the pass to the south. So the sand keeps moving to Miami. And so you'll see a series of those all the way down. If you drive on US 1 and take the beach route, you'll see those pumping houses that pump sand instead of water. Well, the water is the juice that carries the sand through the hydraulics. So, now if you look carefully, you see all these old beach ones? Now these beach ones have trapped water between here and here. Water comes down, but it can't go this way, so it goes in between these ridges and the city here. You know, you got almost 5 million people living right here. Art Marshall, my favorite research biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, was probably the deepest thinker about Everglades. Spent most of his career in it. He was the one who started, you'll never know a swamp until you're up above your navel with an alligator. And Art found that we're getting less and less rainfall into the Everglades. Every decade, the rainfall seems to have been disappearing. And what he was able to determine, looking at old records and so on, is that the trade winds that come in offshore here bring that moisture into the Everglades. But what happened, you see white, in a false color infrared photography like this, what they've done is take a picture in infrared, and then they use the computer and tell it to bias the picture. So in this case, they said, let's make everything that's forested, let's make all of that green. And let's leave everything that is human created and leave that as white. Or if it's in a transition and energy is being given off of it in the state it's got, we'll bias it to the reds. So it's taking energy instead of producing it, right? So that's why you see colors. So all these light blue and blues here are the phosphate mines and the core of lakes in the center of the state that brought people down in the 40s to be able to grow citrus there because it was much warmer than Gainesville where they were getting frozen out. But this whole greenway then, trapped between these beaches and these rivers, is the Kissimmee chain of lakes, and then fed by the Kissimmee River down into Okeechobee. Now the problem was when the water got here, from there on, we don't get that foot a mile drop. We get less than 6 inches in much of it. So the water would pull up here in Okeechobee, and then the winds would build berms around Okeechobee, which of course were enhanced by people back when Hamilton Diston was trying to drain the whole swamp. And so what you're seeing here in these different pink colors and green colors, we're in the Nature Center building, and the color of the roof, shingles, it's what color? This is a test for the view.
It's gray. Gray.
Gray. Well, on infrared, it's going to show up as what? Give you 3 choices: gray, white, or red.
Red?
What do you think?
Red.
Red.
Hot.
I feel like we're wrong.
No.
Oh, okay.
White.
White, because it's man-made.
The white is an energy consumer. So if you look on the edges of the beaches here, white, sand, sand's moving, right? It's consuming energy. All these buildings in these towns, over here in Cape Coral, I won't use the old name one of our cracker board members used to use about this place, but it's an artificial community that was dredged and filled. And look at it, white and slightly pink. The city of Fort Myers is all white, but it's very small and compact. So you start to read a map like this, you can see that all these lakes are trapped because it's flat, and the water has to flow from one to another by creeks overflowing, and then feed down into Okeechobee. But on this side, for instance, if you go from here, right about here, if you drive, let's see, the highway right here, if you drive this highway to the coast, when you come right off of this road right here, you go down a steep hill, more than 2 stories down. And what you're doing is coming down into this valley. And there'll be a few little hills in here, which are these other sandbars, before you get out, into the urban area on the coast. If you come this way though, across this way, what you get is a steady downhill, more than 1 foot per mile. So no hurricane ridges there. Hurricane ridges are way out here because this has enough slope where the water all flowed downhill and broke out in the bays through creeks and things, and it created a whole different kind of environment ecologically and turns out economically because of what you can do on land like this. And the beaches, we have a lagoon, but it's nowhere near like the lagoon there. The inland waterway comes up through that lagoon to Bradenton and Tampa Bay. So that's a quick run through, but a run through that says Florida water down deep, the aquifers do connect to these things up above Ocala that form Ocala National Forest and the springs in the forest, Manatee Springs, all of those are connected to deep water. And great concern today is there's less and less water going into those springs, and the springs are not producing, plus they're getting water quality issues of seepage from urban development into those springs. So there's a whole story here, and Dr. Abraham was just telling a story that I heard too from a little girl who was standing there one day when I'm talking like this, and she's looking, and next thing, Mister, I see old Winnie the Pooh. I said, where did you see Winnie the Pooh? And she says, he's right there. And the whole crew, probably 20 people standing there. We all looked at it. Nobody could find it. I said, go up and point to where Winnie is. And she said, he's right here. He's got a red jacket. As Wynn said, he's kind of hanging up against this coast. And he's trying to hold all of the East Coasters from coming over our side. But why all these different spots is the darkest ones are fields that were just plowed or burned. The pinkish ones are new plants. And the deepest ones and the green ones are ready for harvest. So you can get a sense of where this whole production is. And these water and catchment areas, this is the Arthur Marshall National Wildlife Refuge right here. Named for him because of all the work and our understanding that came from his work. So a map is just a storyboard, and the more you can look at the map, and the more you know about how nature works, and the more you know about how water works, the more you can understand the story and figure out how did things get to be the way they are today, and what are we screwing up now, or how do we fix it, and it's all by reading the map and looking for patterns and relationships and how things are connected or not connected. We're trying to work right now with creating a program in Florida where we connect all of the federal lands that are wild, like Ocala Forest, Everglades National Park, and Big Bend National Park, and all of those big properties with big state lands, the state parks and the state preserves like Babcock Ranch, and hook those all together by using people who are willing to cooperate. A lot of people in the agricultural community say we want to keep our heritage alive. We don't want to build condos here. We want to see us raising food. So they're willing to set aside some of their land so that wildlife can come through it and stay in it and be prepared to hang out and spread out when they need to. And then we look at the county lands, and we see Lee County has some pretty nice park, preserved lands. But now how do we connect them all together? Well, that's what we're working on. And I remember a game I played with my grandchildren called Chutes and Ladders. Remember? You roll the dice and you go, and if you hit a certain block, move back 3 spaces or go forward 5 spaces, right? So we're playing Chutes and Ladders by building underpasses and overpasses, like over I-4 or under I-4. So game can come down, big game, bears and gray panthers, but also all the little things that go with them. But they can go under that system and move down through the Kissimmee chain of lakes. That's pretty rural, and disperse themselves. So that's a whole initiative that's pretty special in Florida. I got to work on some of that up in Alberta when they were doing that 25 years ago, and we learned a lot. We did some things we thought were really cool. I shouldn't tell you this, but we designed over the big Highway 1 in Banff, this big overpass. And we got the overpass, they built it just the way we told them to. We fenced it all just the way we told them to. And then, sure enough, the elk and the caribou and critters were using it. But within a week, the wolves found out they're sending us free food. All we have to do is sit here and wait, and they come right to us.
Oh my gosh.
And the grizzly bears came down off the tops of the ridges in the summertime. So they were becoming a problem because they too found it much easier to just kind of wait for these things to come by and pick them off. So we had to kind of rethink everything. How do you work with that problem? But see, that's what's so much fun about working on environmental stuff and taking what we know about nature and trying to figure out solutions that let people do what things we would need to do, but also create the spaces so wildlife, when they're stressed, have a chance to move out and move to other territories when there's a drought here in this part of the state, or whether they can't find a mate up here. We have panthers from Lee County going all the way to Disney World looking for a mate. And all they find are kind of mannequins and statues. But I know of 2 panthers that have been killed on I-4, left here, and then got killed on one on the way back. I hope he produced an offspring during that time. But we have an overpass, a panther pass down on Corkscrew Road. There's one being built right now on the new highway on 31. That'll connect Cecil Webb all the way across the state, Lake Okeechobee. Isn't that cool?
Yep.
So that's a wandering story. And the last one I'll leave you with is, what's this white line down here?
The Keys.
The Keys, the Florida Keys. But if you look at the Keys, they disappear here. Well, they're in green. Well, green is, is growing stuff. But when you get down here, you'll notice at the end here, the Keys all go this way, and go across 7 Mile Bridge, and then the Keys go this way. Big Pine Key, and then each key is east to west. And what's happening here in Florida Bay, this Florida Bay down here gets really warm in the summertime because it's pretty still. It doesn't get a lot of circulation and a lot of waves. So in that warm water, lime from shells will go into solution and then precipitate when it cools down and form these little lime chunks. And then they get rolled by the current all the way across the bay here, and they start to pop through these islands. And if you feel the sand on those island beaches that go this way, they're like BBs. But if you feel the sand up here, the coral that's been washed down and ground up, it's much more like sand. And it's all because of wind and waves, and it changes who can live where, just because all that's happening. So there's 1,000 more stories there. You can invent your own.
Well, we'll get more of those stories. We've been listening to Dr. Bill Hammond, everybody. Let's give it up for Bill Hammond.
Yeah.